Okay, so the question was, is we've got a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with labels, and how do we set those labels up? So if you start off with an 8.5 by 11, the thing you want to do is where you want to start aligning the label is up at this top left corner. So first what you got to do is find out is how many labels they got on a sheet. Most are a 10 vertically with 3 columns. So we end up with column, column, and a space in between and a margin area. Then we end up with the height of a label. So there are a couple parameters in here that you can end up changing within Transact on when you go to do the label format. So where you start first, we know how many labels are there. The next piece is we want to know what this height is of the label and the width. So the height, if we look at our label, that's the label, let's say it has a little header on it or whatever, but the label itself will then have another label underneath of it. And when you consider the height is from here to the height of the next label. And that will be, say, a 1 inch. We don't want to measure just the height of the label by itself because we need to know what this white area is. We are using sticky labels, so these labels get removed, and it's not like you can buy labels that are actually perforated, and in that case you're doing the same thing. You're measuring from perforation to perforation, and you tear those out, and it may go into a slide type of plastic thing that sits on the shelf. So once you know what this height is, then when you come into, let me do my other picture that is the form in Transact. So the form's here, and you'll find there's a bar that says detail. And if you double click on that, you can set the height. Now the height is going to be in decimals, so you may need to do some math, but in most cases 1 inch is 1 inch. So you put in the 1 inch. Now, the thing to do next is simply print it. Just see what happens. So if you print it and the label lands perfectly up here, and you want to do at least 10, if not 30 labels, but use plain paper. So when you take the piece of paper, stick it up in the light against the actual labels, and you can actually see what's going on. Because there's nothing like burning 30 labels at a time, on a full page. It's not like the little bitty ones. They're a little more expensive. Okay, so the problem usually is the dang thing doesn't line up in some manner. Where to start, again, is up in the top corner, and you're looking for the margin and the height to get it to fit right in this corner. Now, there are 2 settings here. If you go to the page setup, you'll find that there's a left margin, and obviously then you can adjust it, making it wider to push it to the right. Makes sense. And then if you find that this is too close to the top, there's a page header, and you can pull that down. Again, you can double click on that line and you can increase this height. What you want to watch though is that you can increase this height, but don't forget it's going to be pushing the other labels down the page. So if, oh, this is lined up, I'm great, I'm good to go, and you print your page of labels and you find, well, this one's creeped down and it's down and it's down, well, it's probably not just the page height, but it's probably the label height has lied. And you go back and you adjust this label height, going back to the detail portion. So that gets your labels lined up that are on the left hand side, you're at the top of the page, and they're breaking nicely as you go down. Those are 2 pieces, or 3 pieces. This height, and this left margin. Now you can start looking at the rest of the piece of paper. Don't worry about columns 2 and 3 until you've got column 1 figured out. Because the only thing you're going to find in column 2 and 3 is it's the spacing in between the columns. And there are going to be two things that can affect that. One is this width is off slightly, that you've got the label too wide, and the only way to adjust that is back in the page setup, and that's in the width of the label. You can adjust it there. This height is only adjustable on the form itself. So usually what I'll find is if this edge of the label, and we're talking about the first character of the description or the item ID, if it's the same distance that it's skewed to the right as this one, then it's probably the spacing. But if this one's over, say, 1/2 inch too far, and this one's over 3/4 of an inch too far, then it's probably the label width itself. So I usually start with very little spacing and then see what this width is doing. If it's skewed over a similar amount, then I look at, again, what I'm measuring is from, if this is ABC as a description, always do the same label. Don't do a variety of different items because it'll goof you up. Measure from here to here, and if this distance is the same as over to here, then your label's probably correct in width. So if it's not the same width, you want to mess with your spacing in between the two labels. But if you're looking at, it's measure from here over and from here over to here. And that's it.